this morning, Finding, Exploring, and Sharing. We're going to discuss 3 ways to increase the development and efficiency of analytics and its adoption. We anticipate that this will be about a 20-25 minute presentation with some time at the end for the questions. So if you don't mind holding on to your questions till the end, or go ahead and type them into the questions section of the webinar software, that would be great. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Outline of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to do a quick overview of Perkins Consulting, and then we're going to spend a fair amount of time. I'm going to talk a bit about what we're seeing out there in our client base and the larger analytics and reporting market of why do we even need these capabilities? What are some of the roadblocks and problems that people are experiencing? And then we'll talk about different ways, different capabilities that help to solve those problems, finding, exploring, sharing of data, and then wrap it up with a conclusion and some Q&A. So pretty straightforward. Dive right in. So Perkins Consulting, we've been doing analytics, information management, reporting, dashboarding, data mart development, all those sorts of things since 1994, so an awful lot of experience. We're really focused on making information powerful, and what we mean by that is that information has to be put together in such a way that our clients, organizations, are in alignment. They have the same understanding of the information. They have confidence in the information so they can make really good decisions. They're able to communicate and articulate data concepts back and forth. When they talk about customers, everybody's talking about the same thing. And they have a really good process, a really reliable, consistent, efficient process for working with data. So a big focus for us in the last few years has really been around these areas of data quality and kind of enterprise-wide information enablement. Again, development efficiency, being able to create reports, dashboards, and things efficiently, and getting the organizations, our client organizations, to where they can use that information efficiently. So what are some of these issues that we're seeing our clients encounter right now that make us think that some new capabilities are needed? I love this quote. This is a quote from, gosh, probably 40-something years ago. Herbert Simon, an early 1970s era information economist. But he's just pointing out what I think we all see, which is, boy, there is a lot of data out there these days, a lot of information. Every business, even the mid-sized businesses that are our clients, are creating a lot of data and a lot of information. And they're challenged to make use of this, right? In the old days, maybe we could print out all of our orders for the month and look at them and scan them for anomalies, right? These days, the volume of data is too great for that. This graph here actually comes from Twitter, right? Their engineers have to monitor the millions and millions of tweets that they see every day, and there's certainly no way for a human being to do that. So they've developed some very sophisticated anomaly detection software, and this is kind of showing, you know, a volume of data with some seasonal peaks in it. And then it's showing with the little green circles where their software is highlighting anomalies that need a human being to pay attention to them. This is also interesting, by the way, because they've open sourced this software. They basically put it out there for free, and it runs in a free desktop application. So really anybody on Earth can take advantage of the hundreds of hours of engineering that went into this anomaly detection. So volume of data, that's definitely a reason. An area that our clients are challenged with. You know, there's been several studies out there that show that 80% of knowledge workers, and most of us are knowledge workers these days, spend our time searching for data, right? Because the obvious stuff we already have right in front of us, but we spend our time on the stuff that we can't find. Where is that spreadsheet? Where are those production numbers from last month, right? Similarly, in very sophisticated organizations that have data scientists, maybe places like Twitter, they've done studies and watched data scientists work, and they spend about 80% of their time trying to find the right data, and then munging the data, which is kind of the technical term for trying to get that data organized in a way that they can actually make use of it. And they only spend 20% of their time actually doing any analysis, which is sad, right? So all of this together is reducing our development efficiency, reducing our time for coming up with new, really earth-shattering analysis. It also, I'll try not to come down on the politics of this one way or another, but it also means that there's a lot of time wasted on trying to define exactly what data you're trying to find, right? Are you trying to find a fact or an alternative fact? Are we estimating the US GDP for the first time, or are we on the second revision, or are we on the third revision, or are we on the fourth revision? All of those sorts of factors also make this searching for information a lot harder than it really needs to be. Another trend that we see with our clients is people are not making simple binary decisions as much anymore. That area has been kind of conquered. Should we ship this order today, yes or no? Do we need to emphasize sales of this product, yes or no? That sort of stuff has been done, and more we're seeing people really wrestling with optimization problems. So a couple of examples, a retail store, right, trying to figure out of this clothing assortment, how many sizes do we need to have of this particular product, and how many different colors should we offer? That sort of assortment planning, that's very much an optimization question, right? You have a limited amount of store space, and you're trying to kind of maximize your profitability. Another good one is manufacturing, sort of the sales and operation expense planning. At a real high level, what are we going to manufacture that uses our manufacturing capacity, our people, our machinery, in the most efficient and profitable way? So again, it's an optimization question. There's no simple answer to that. And then the other one that we're starting to see is more and more people are asking for predictive modeling. How can my data help me predict what's going to happen? An interesting example of this we did a few years back was looking at a retail client's sales and noticing that although we thought there were a lot of factors that might correlate to increased sales, the one that correlated most strongly was the outside temperature. So literally, if the temperature was between 60 and 80, that's when they sold the most, and that had the strongest correlation. Traditionally, these numbers come from kind of some industry-wide studies in the retail space. So traditionally, strong correlations, and a correlation of 1 would be a perfect 100% correlation, come from, are you in stock on the product that the customer wants? How much do you pay your associates or your staff? And how's your retail organization rated? Do people like your company? Do they trust your company? So it's just interesting that in this particular situation, it turned out to be the outside temperature at the strongest correlation and none of these other factors, right? But that's the kind of predictive thing that people are wanting to do now. And in order to do that, we need some new capabilities in analytics. This fellow, Eric Bjornsson, I'm sure I cannot pronounce his last name. He's actually written a couple of very interesting books over the last few years, but this quote is actually from a paper a while back. But they did quite a study on publicly traded companies, right, who have published financials to show that if they were data-driven, if they had adopted certain practices in how they used data, their output and productivity as measured by their publicly available financial statements was typically 5 to 6% higher. So I think more and more there's an awareness in organizations that this is possible, that by leveraging these tools and techniques we can be a lot more operationally efficient. What is data-driven decision making? Well, again, this is a cultural challenge, and not every organization has been able to do this, but it's really all about not getting the cart in front of the horse. It's reviewing data and having hypotheses about those data, and then making decisions based on how those hypotheses hold up. It is not simply using data to justify something that you already think should be done, right? So this is not an easy place for organizations to get themselves to. But if you're going to get themselves to this point, then we would argue you've got to have confidence in the data, and you've got to be able to communicate it. You have to have a shared understanding. You know, when one person in the organization says a customer, everybody else has to have a common mental model of what a customer is, right? There's also a lot of new possibilities out there. I have one of these Amazon Echo devices at home. I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. There's a lot of new interfaces to data. Siri on your Apple iPhone, Alexa, the new Google Home, chatbots are really taking off. All of these require new capabilities in how we manage our data. If we want to enable some of these things with our organization's data, we need these new capabilities. Another aspect that we've seen be very successful with some of our clients is if we have some common definitions of business terms and we link our data to those business terms, it puts all of us on a kind of a common viewpoint of what our business is about, right? So we're all thinking in alignment, we're all going on the same path, we're all focused on the same things. It really pays off when you're trying to do something new or when your market is changing on you, right? You can communicate about these new ideas. You're not just cranking out the same old reports more efficiently. And then I would argue there's a huge unexplored space out there around sort of the social graph of information. If I know that Fred's using this data, does that make it more valuable to me? Does that help inform my decisions about whether or not I use that data? A lot of opportunities there. Didn't want to emphasize our Alex tool that we built here at Perkins Consulting too much, but this is kind of an early screenshot of mock-up of an interface just to illustrate some concepts around what is finding information, what's involved in that. It's more than just search, right? It's more than just finding a thing. You need a broader perspective. So for instance, in this little example here on the right, you know, we've typed in deferred revenue and hit enter. And we've gotten back a couple of definitions of deferred revenue in a related term. We've got an example of where it's actually been used somewhere in our organization. And we've got a couple of defined data sets out there that are ready for use that we could go build reports upon. And we've got this person, this John Doe person, who apparently has created a bunch of these reports or created these data sets, and therefore have been identified as an expert. So this is an example of a search capability that would help us provide trust in that data. It would help us make sure we're talking about the same thing because we've got the definition, and it would provide sort of certified or stamp of approval on reports and data sets. And it provides that human connection as well. So we need all these things to really be efficient in developing new things and really be able to use data to change the business. So that's kind of finding. I know what I want deferred revenue, where is it? Exploring is the bigger picture. I'm not sure, I'm a new hire in an organization, I'm not sure what data is available, right? Or I'm not sure what data is available about customers. Search can definitely be a starting point, right? I mean, I could start this process of exploration by, if I'm a brand new hire, I could type customer into the search box and see what I got. There's a lot of interesting research going on out there around this. You know, this was kind of an academic spin at it, but people were trying to come up with information maps that would show you timelines of information and would show you the colors represent different perspectives on the information, different angles on the information. Another one that I really liked is this is off Uber's website, right? So this is showing you the little bright lines. You can't even hardly see it, but somewhere under there is New York City, right? In the center there where the lines are brightest. So they're showing you all the trips that people took on a given day, right, to examine traffic patterns. So I would argue that visualizations may be a start on solving this problem. But if you're really going to create a mental model of all your data and how it interacts with your business, you know, something like this Uber visualization is not going to achieve that, right? So again, if you're a new hire or a report developer or a business analyst in an organization, you're trying to get going, you really need a clear mental model of the business. And it needs to show the breadth, what's all the data we've got, but it also needs to be able to drill down into a fair amount of detail and show all the relationships. In our data, are customers related to the chart of accounts? Probably not. So one way to do it is through what they call a Sun diagram. So putting transactional data, sources that you have transactions or events information about, like in this case, it's the rectangle in the center that says general ledger transaction, and then showing all of the descriptive attributes or dimensions that you have about that. So for each GL transaction, we know the date it happened, the business unit it was associated with, and the account it was associated with. So that's one way to do it, and a technique that we've used pretty successfully in the past is just to publish these Sun diagrams to help people explore what data is available. Our Alex application, again, which I don't want to push that too hard here, but it actually uses an interactive tree view where you can start with one type of transaction or event and drill down in to see the interrelationships, the connections, the volume of data, and the details. Another important question is what's not there. I mean, some people may recognize this little picture here on the right. This is a classic sort of optical illusion. Is this a picture of a white vase, or is it a picture of two black silhouettes of faces looking at each other, right? The same thing when you're exploring data, right? Are we looking at the figure or the ground? What data do we have or not have? An example to make this a little more personal, in my business at Perkins Consulting, we don't track our expenses very carefully. We track our revenue very carefully, right? Our expenses as a small consulting firm are pretty boring and they don't change much. But we had an issue just in the last year where suddenly realized that our infrastructure, our IT infrastructure costs had gone way, way up by like an order of magnitude, because we were out there creating new Azure virtual machines and new Azure data warehouses and all this kind of stuff, and the costs had just taken off. So that's an example where we need to know that we are not tracking that area, that we have no data in that area in order to really be aware of our business. Bunch of different ways to do it. You can compare yourself to all kinds of industry standards, schema.org in terms of categorization of products and things like that. There are published industry data models that are pretty easy to compare against. There are also published industry process models, like from AQPC, that you can use. So sharing. When I say sharing, no likes, please. Gosh, let's not have likes on data, right? And let's not have any sharing that requires a huge amount of effort. Let's not have to tell our report developers, oh, you built a report, now you have to sit down and write all this documentation about it, right? That takes us away from the efficiency we're trying to achieve. So we really want to use this sort of data exhaust, this sort of stuff that just flies off as we go about our daily work and we create reports and analysis and we consume them. We want to capture that data exhaust. without people having to spend a lot of time creating documentation. Another important thing is to try to fight data entropy. I mean, if you have one data set, and we all probably know this, it tends to become 5 and then 10 and then, you know, because first you have, well, I have this spreadsheet of data, but then I have somebody copied it and they added 2 more columns to it. And then somebody copied that one and took one of the columns away and added a different one. That's what I'm referring to about data entropy, that never-ending sort of growth and splintering that happens. And I think as organizations, we have to be aware of that. We have to have an inventory of that. But we also have to recognize it's going to happen. Google, obviously, is very big on data, right? They have an interesting internal project where they've come up with something called Google Goods that literally, it's just a program that goes out and crawls through their organization and looks for data sets and indexes them and inventories them. Another technique that we've seen be very successful is certification of data sets. If people are going to create 14 variants of an Excel spreadsheet, then let's have our crawler tell us that there are 14 variations of that data sets, and let's try to push on people to say, hey, can we validate that data so that it could be reused? Could we set up some ongoing automated tests to make sure it doesn't drift or become inaccurate? And could we do some markup on it? Could we capture, I mean, again, this is back to kind of Google's suggestions about attributes that you might want to capture for a data set. Could we capture some of this stuff so that it could be found in our search engine and more easily reused? Just briefly point out that, you know, if you know where your data is and who's using it, that means you can protect it. In fact, with a lot of these regulations, PCI for retail, HIPAA for the healthcare, Patriot Act for financial services, and the European Union's new general data protection, the first part of complying with all of these is simply to know what data you have and where it is and who's using it, right? So if we're capturing that data exhaust and capturing that information, we're a step ahead on that. So that's a lot of material presented in about 20 minutes. By way of conclusion, our experience is every organization we work with now has business intelligence. They have data, they have reporting and analytics tools, they have lots of data, they have staff, they have people working on these things. But there is still a big challenge to use it to really effectively drive improvement, right? Not just cranking out the same reports faster, but really changing the business. And we believe that these 3 capabilities, the finding, you know, being able to search for things and get to it quickly and have confidence in it, the exploring, being able to get that kind of big picture of what all is available in this organization, and that sharing, being able to inventory through data exhaust these data sets and understand where they are. Those are the 3 big key capabilities going forward. And we're, of course, like I said, we have an Alex application. It's a cloud-based application that addresses each of these 3 challenges explicitly. Always happy to talk about that. Well, thank you. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any follow-up for me or anything, feel free to call or email. We're certainly offering kind of a free assessment, or sit down and have a discussion about these things and kind of how you're doing them today and how you could quickly and easily do it better, perhaps. Okay. So with that, I will open it up here for questions. I'll take a look here in the webinar tool and see if there are any questions out there. So if anybody has any that they want to type in, go ahead and we'll hang out here for a moment. That's actually a screenshot of Alex there on the right, who's kind of showing the search capability. Well, that was either way too confusing a presentation and everybody's stumped, or it was just crystal clear, and there are no questions, so I'm certainly not seeing any questions coming in at the moment. I'll give it another minute or two in case anybody wants to type some. But otherwise, I definitely thank you all for attending, and like I said, feel free to reach out to me directly as well, and the contact information is right there on the screen. All right, looks like no questions this morning, so that's good. Thank you, everyone.